Welcome back to another episode of GlobeZ. I'm Eli Moyes.
And I'm Charlotte Redeker, and today we're going to be talking about coronavirus in the developing world. Now, I know you're probably thinking that we just created this channel to throw a ton of terrible news at you, and coronavirus headed to developing countries is obviously not great. But, believe it or not, today we're actually going to mix in a bit of good news. To understand how truly tragic this is, we have to take a look back. There are two main reasons the coronavirus is particularly damaging to developing countries. The first of which is debt. Let's take, for example, the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. Now imagine a little town. Let's call it Bubble Land. Bubble Land is working very hard to grow their economy, and they've upped their production of magical bubbles. But they have a pretty big issue. They don't have any roads or ports, and they have not yet figured out how to make a magical bubble transportation system. So they can't connect with the rest of the world. What they need is a loan. In this example, let's say China lends them some money so they can build a road, which is beneficial to China because they now have access to some pretty sick bubbles, and beneficial to Bubble Land because they now can sell their bubbles. It sounds great, except there are some things hidden in there that aren't really as beneficial to Bubble Land as you would think. Most of China's terms are pretty expensive, meaning that countries like Bubble Land did not really have the opportunity to spend a ton on anything else. Then on top of that, for things like bubble factories, China brought their own workers in to build them and brought their own concrete, so the local economy was not stimulated very much. Then, China didn't really reveal very much about what went down during these deals, so organizations like the World Bank or IMF that might lend to Bubble Land don't really know what they're lending into. And on to the second issue. Now we're focusing on coronavirus a bit more. People are pretty much stuck in their houses, if you didn't know already, meaning that nobody can really do work. So the bubbles can't get into their containers if they were somehow produced already, and then they can't get onto the handy-dandy road and travel around the world because borders are heavily restricted.
One of the saddest parts of this situation, though, is that many people in developing countries have limited access to healthcare and limited safety nets, meaning that the virus doesn't even have to hit their countries hard for them to feel the full, brutal impact. If that isn't enough, many lower-income countries have extremely dense populations and limited sanitation, exactly the things coronavirus needs to thrive. It seems that everything is stacked against these countries, and more importantly, the people who live in these countries. Now, I know I said I had some good news, so here it is. The G20 agreed on debt relief for lower-income countries. I know, it's crazy, the G20 actually agreeing on something. And no, the G20 does not stand for Great 20, Glorious 20, or the Gangster 20, though I really wish it did. It would have been much more creative. It actually just stands for Group of 20. Which is actually a group of 19 countries and the EU, and they tried to tackle the world's worst financial issues. But with all group projects, there's always that one kid who seemingly always disagrees, and recently, that kid or country has been the United States. But believe it or not, they've agreed on a plan to help lower-income countries deal. This plan includes bilateral government loan forgiveness. And if you were like me, you're probably asking right now, what the heck is that? And like you, I had no idea what it was before I did some research, but in reality, it's like most things, a fancy name for something that's really quite simple.
And remember that debt I mentioned earlier? Yeah, this basically takes that debt and pushes the deadline back. Just to be clear, it didn't go away though. And believe it or not, China is in on the agreement, meaning countries with Belt and Road Initiative debt have their deadline pushed back a bit. Anyway, the Saudi Arabian finance minister is the head of the G20 right now, and he says that this deal could be worth more than $20 billion. He's also reached out to encourage private investors to help out, and the IMF is doing their part too. The IMF is an international organization that works towards monetary cooperation and gives financial assistance, and usually a few countries ask them for help a year. Right now, more than half of their members have. They've responded to this by essentially doubling their emergency funding. And now that we're feeling super cheery over this sweet new deal, I have some more bad news for you all. Sorry, guys. Estimates say that emerging markets will need $2.5 trillion to effectively deal with coronavirus. Now, the IMF has $1 trillion in funding, and the new emergency funding is $100 billion. Start to see the problem?
So, although the G20 and the IMF did take a step in the right direction with these debt relief measures, it's only a fraction of what these countries will actually need. Thank you for watching this week's episode of GlobeZ. Make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll be back next week, hopefully with an interview covering more international affairs.